Welcome back, folks. We've reached episode 3 of our do-it-yourself optimized compact players kit. Before I start, I want to make a correction in regards to last episode. I said raise the blade on the table saw up high, and that yielded a bunch of splintering on this. Really what you do is should keep the blade low, maybe half an inch, 3/4 of an inch, something like that. And as you can see, I did that on the rest of the drums, and that yielded a lot nicer edges. This is the floor tom. We also changed the specs. The floor tom is actually going to be 12 deep instead of 14 deep after consulting with some drummers that know more than I do. So that's further correction for last week's episode. Today we're going to artificially petrify the drum shells. Now, of course, because these drum shells are ply, we're not going to be able to petrify right through. But what we can do is petrify the outer ply and the inner ply. So that's what we're going to do today. There are two ways that you can petrify the outer and inner plies. Some people recommend using fiberglass resin. And what you do in that case is you dilute or thin the fiberglass resin with about 3 or 4 parts acetone to 1 part fiberglass resin. And there's another thing you can use as well, and that's oil-based enamel. Enamel dries harder than lacquer, varnish, or drying oils like tung oil, and that's why enamel is suitable for this particular application. And if you're using enamel, you want to thin it also 3 to 4 parts paint thinner or mineral spirits to 1 part enamel. I've got a pre-mixture here which consists of 3 parts paint thinner, 1 part enamel. I do like using fiberglass resin as well, and one thing about fiberglass resin is on the inside of the shell, which will be visible sometimes, you can make it really, really beautiful. If you take your time, you let the first coat really soak in, and then you put another coat of unthinned fiberglass resin over top, or maybe 2, and then polish that, you can actually get an inside surface that looks like glass. I didn't have any fiberglass hardener. I have fiberglass resin, but I'm all out of hardener. But I did have enamel. It happens to be black, so these are going to be black, petrified black. But like I said, you can use fiberglass enamel, or fiberglass resin, in which case you can get a glass-like finish on the inside. But we're just going to use black, oil-based enamel, diluted 3 parts paint thinner to 1 part enamel. And the reason we thin it is so that it can really soak into the wood. We want it to totally saturate the entire inner ply and the entire outer ply. So it'll be like simulating the effects of a hybrid shell, you know, where they put a ply of maple on the inside and outside and poplar on the center plies. So this will sort of emulate something along those lines. And we want to put it on pretty thick because we want to give it a chance to really soak in. One thing I want to say at this particular time is, so I'm cutting new bearing edges, so I'm not masking these edges because I'm going to cut new ones. If you have no intention, sometimes, even if I'm not planning on cutting new edges, I still just go ahead and seal right over the edges. Sometimes I just seal drum shells, sometimes I petrify like this. Either way, I usually go ahead and just paint right over the bearing edges anyway, because even if I'm not cutting new bearing edges, I do like to sand them. I find that there are very few bearing edges from the factory, even on higher end drums, that don't benefit from a little bit of final sanding. If you don't want to sand your bearing edges or cut new bearing edges, you do have to mask them before sealing your shells or petrifying your shells, because if you have your heads contact a sealer or enamel like this, it's going to get sticky, making them really, really, really hard to tune. So, another thing I want to mention while I'm soaking in this first inner ply of our, I guess this is the 10-inch, is this. I've had a couple of viewers point out to me that some of the methods we use at compactdrums.com and on these videos are less than professional and certainly sometimes not very sophisticated. And that's fine. I don't mind people telling me that because it's true. A lot of times, especially when you're dealing with inexpensive drums like this, a fast way to good results suits me just fine. But of course, when you do follow our fast track, sometimes slipshod methods, there's of course no bragging rights at the end to brag about your superior workmanship or anything like that. And also, as very wisely pointed out by one of our viewers, if you have a really nice vintage drum or drum kit that you're looking at sprucing up, restoring, or improving, obviously you want to take a little bit more serious approach than the way we do it here. You don't want to, oh look, my drill bit was a bit dull, so I'm going to have to sort of wiggle the drill around a little bit to get through here and stuff. Of course, you don't want to do that if you're dealing with a collector's item. You want to do a really good job. You want to take your time, get a fresh drill bit like I actually did on the rest of these shells, and you want to do it the way I suggested. Drill from the outside only until the brad point pokes through the inner ply, and then drill the rest from the inside. So that's my disclaimer. Some of our methods are slipshod, quick and dirty, get the job done. I do promise you, however, I promise you, you will be impressed with the results of this. Even though some of our methods seem very unsophisticated, when we're done with this, the results will speak for themselves. You guys will be impressed, that is a promise. So I'm doing the inside first, because obviously if I do the outside first, then I don't have any surface to rest it on when I do the inside. I'm going to point out another thing as well. So, as you guys remember, if you watched the first episode, I did a nasty job of the edge here. And as you can see, since then, before getting to this episode, I've repaired that. So, since the last episode, I've cut down the rest of the shells. I've drilled all the holes. And I actually made a change. If you're a good observer, you'll notice when you look at the 10-inch and the 12-inch toms, all of a sudden the holes, they're not lined up, the lug holes, they're staggered like on old vintage Sonors. And that's because I realized that on the 10-inch, the lugs are just about going to touch each other. And when I do find an 8-inch shell, which I'm looking for but I haven't found one yet, they're going to not fit the way we had them in a straight line. So instead I decided I'm going to stagger them. I had two choices. I have a whole bunch of really cool single point lugs that would have solved that problem for me. But I also used to have a set of vintage Sonor teardrops, and I really dig that look of the lugs staggered or offset from each other. So I decided that's going to be the solution that I go with for solving that problem on these drums. So there you have it. If you were observant enough to notice that, that's what I'm up to there. So because I'm putting it on fairly thick, because I really do want it to soak in, and as you can see, I'm soaking in the edges too, because why not? At least that way I get the hard contact between plies where the edges are. And I even don't mind if I soak in a little bit in the holes, even though that's probably not really going to happen much. So that's with the staggered lugs. Another thing that I can take this opportunity to point out is, so the repair I did on the 12-inch tom, or the filling of all that nastiness that I caused when I had the blade up too high, there are a few different, I have a few different products I like to use when filling holes or making small patching like that in a wood shell. One of the products I like to use is, and I'm sure I'll get negative comments about this, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of the products I like to use is Bondo. Yeah, the cheap stuff that people frown on for using on cars to repair auto body, which means it's probably going to be even more frowned upon to use it for drum shell repair. But you know what? Bondo sticks to just about anything, and it dries. It's very easy to work with before it dries, and once it dries really hard and very, very resonant. When you think about it, those pearl wood fiberglass shells, they sound fantastic, and that's got a whole layer of fiberglass inside, and that's really what Bondo is. It's fiberglass resin with fine fiberglass hairs mixed into it so that it becomes a filler. So that's one of the products I like to use for this kind of purpose, even to fill holes if I have too many holes that I need to fill, or for repairs as well. Another thing I like to use, and again, you guys can frown at this, but think about it and you'll realize that it's a pretty good idea. Something that's really easy to work with is, of course, drywall compound. Obviously, drywall compound is going to be more or less useless for drum repair because it's brittle, and yeah, the reasons are obvious. But if you take drywall compound and mix in at about a ratio of 1 part drywall, or 3 parts drywall compound to 1 part fortified white glue, or PVA as it's also called, wood glue, regular wood glue. Fortified meaning like Weld Bond or one of the other fortified PVAs that have additives to make it better, stronger, lasts, take a little longer before it dries. You mix that with drywall compound and you get a product that's actually very suitable for fixing drums with. Again, you get a product that's very easy to work with, it's water-based, and it dries very hard and very strong. So that's a little tip of the day. What I've done with this shell, I didn't do that, because either Bondo, or if I mix drywall compound with a fortified PVA, I end up with something that's already sealed and is not going to be able to absorb any of this thinned out enamel. So I used, in this particular case, because I'm doing this sealing petrification process, I used just plain old drywall compound. Nothing added to it, because that's what this layer is all about. I want that drywall compound to also be able to absorb this thinned enamel that I'm working with here. So there's another hot tip. Well folks, I've got the shells all covered, and believe it or not, I mixed up about 1 liter of the mixture that I mentioned, and except for a little splash at the bottom of the coffee can I was using, it's all gone. These drums soaked it in. The nice thing with using enamel as opposed to fiberglass resin or lacquer is that it dries very slowly, so you've got plenty of time to work the enamel into the wood. You can even, if you want to put it on a bit thinner so that it's easier to avoid any runs, you can go back and put on a second coat before the first coat is dried, and it'll continue to soak in. I think I got enough in because, like I said, I've given these drums close to 1 liter of the mixture, and it's all soaked in. They're almost like dry-like. Maybe I will actually go back, and I think I will put 1 more coat on while they're still wet, because it never hurts to saturate as much as possible. You want to get those inner and outer plies really saturated, because when this stuff dries inside the wood, it's going to make the wood really, really hard. Another advantage with enamel, as opposed to the fiberglass resin approach, is you can get creative. You can use your imagination. Black, of course, might look a little doomsday-ish, but it actually looks really cool with clear heads later, you'll see. But of course you can use silver enamel for that silver sealer look, or you can use a beige light brown for that chocolate milk look, or you can use a gray sealer depending on depending on the look that you want. I once did at Wallapus we have a drum wrap called snakeskin, and it's very green and bright. And I did a jungle kit with the snakeskin, green bright snakeskin wrap on the outside, and I petrified those shells with a bright green enamel, like John Deere green, and it looked really wicked. It almost gave them a transparent effect, like, because the green was both on the inside and the outside, it almost gave them like a Ludwig Vistalite acrylic shells effect. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. I may or may not go back and give these another coat while they're still wet. That might be a good idea, but maybe not. Maybe they'll never dry if I do that. I'll have to think about it. I still have plenty of time because these aren't going to be dry for hours and hours. If you do go the enamel route, leave it to dry for a few days before going to the next step. If you go fiberglass, then remember you can only mix up a little bit at a time, because that stuff has a very short working time, maybe 15 minutes, and then it dries and you've got to mix up a new batch. Next episode is going to be really interesting, because I'm going to show you guys how to cut bearing edges with a regular kitchen blender and some tin foil. Believe it or not, that's what's happening in the next episode, and I hope to be getting to that episode in just a few days. I just want to make sure I give these shells a few days to dry thoroughly, and then I'll be back. Hope to see you joining in, tuning in, checking out our next episode, Cutting Bearing Edges, in just a few days.